cloud. All right, so let's see. Somewhere coming up, it's not till March 16th, so it's more than 2 weeks away. We have a day set aside where we're going to go over the exam question by question. There's still a few students who haven't taken it because they were quarantined, but I think they're going to finish it off today. If for some reason that day doesn't work for you, we could talk about that like in my office sometime. We will not be recording that day. So that to be live or on Zoom, I guess, to be able to do that. So what else do we have going on here? So we have a project. Next project is due on Monday. It's a Big Boggle project. So it's basically a project dealing with arrays. This game here is called Big Boggle. There are 25 cubes. Each cube, oddly enough, has 6 sides. And what we're going to do is we're going to randomize these. We're randomizing them both in terms of which face is showing and where the cubes are. And so the way that you play have you played the game? Anyone played this game? Yeah, I grew up on this game. So, we would look at this and we'd try to find words that are at least 4 letters long. Let's see if I can even find one here. Yeah, I never was all that good at it. Okay, here's one. So ties, T, and then I can go from that letter to any of the ones that it's touching. So T-I-E-S. So that would be a word that I would kind of write down, and that would be worth 1 point. Unless someone else at the table that we're playing has also got that word, and then you have to cross it off. So you only get points for the ones that you get that no one else gets. And the larger the more letters that are in the word, the more points you get for the word. And I can't remember exactly what I think. Four. I don't know if 3-letter words are allowed. Anyway, it kind of goes up from there. Okay, so what you're doing here in this project is you are making it so that you can play this game in Excel. You don't have to do anything to try to see if, you don't have to worry about people typing in the words and checking to see if they're real words or if the words really are in the grid. No. You're just rolling the dice. So basically push a button and roll the dice. And so you have to do kind of two ideas of randomization. One is going to be where the dice are. And I've actually given you the definition of these cubes, right? So the real cubes that Hasbro or Mattel or whoever made this game made. So, this one, let's see if I can find the hard one. Here's the hard one. This one has J, X, K, B, Z, and Q are the ones that are on this. Incidentally, each of those letters only appears on this cube. So you can never spell bubble in this game because there's only one B, and it's right there. So that's just a word you can't make. So anyway, so you've got the definition of the cubes, and you've got to do the real cubes in the proper order. Okay, any questions on that project? All right. Let's see. So we've got the exam review, Big Boggle. And so today we're starting the content for the next project, which is due March 9th. So these are both kind of close together, just a little bit more than a week apart from each other. So, let's go ahead and do our little quote for today. Oops, not Thomas Jefferson. So this is John Adams. As you may know, John Adams, kind of one of the early things he did in his his public career was defend 9 men who were absolutely hated. So in 1770, March 5th, 1770 was the Boston Massacre. I know you've heard of it. By this time, 1 out of every 5 residents of Boston is a British soldier. Why are there so many British soldiers in Boston in 1770? Are we like at war with one? No, we're not at war. What are they here for? Well, it turns out they are here to make the colonists pay their taxes. And here's how it's worked for about 150 years. Parliament would levy a tax on America. America would ignore the tax. Parliament would send people out to enforce the tax, and it would cost them more to enforce the tax than they would get from actually enforcing the tax. And so they would give up. It's pretty good. We thought that's the way taxes were supposed to work. Well, after the French and Indian War, Great Britain has incurred so much debt, kind of securing North America, at least the eastern part of North America for itself, then we got to get these Americans to pay their fair share. In fact, by this time, 1/4 of the British Empire lives in North America. that's crazy. It's that large of a percentage. And so they are here to compel us to pay the new taxes that have been levied. But so there's a bunch of them. We don't want to pay our taxes. You're here to make our pay our taxes. We don't like them. Plus, what are soldiers allowed to do when they're not on duty? And the answer is anything that's legal, including look for work. So they've got their room and board, plus they get paid on top of that, not much, 3 cents a day. 3 pence a day is what you're making as a professional soldier in the 18th century of the British Army. But if you can find day work, if you can find day labor, that's great. And there's so many of them kind of looking for day labor when they're not working, when they're not on duty. They've depressed the price of labor in Boston as well. So there's kind of even more reasons to hate them. And so when this problem breaks out, and these soldiers from the 29th Regiment end up killing, I think, 7 colonists, we want to lynch him. The lieutenant governor at the time, Thomas Hutchinson, kind of comes out. Mobs are forming. He saw, we are going to have a fair trial for these men, and he kind of quells the mobs, but it's kind of a really anticipated trial. No one's going to defend him. And John Adams agrees to defend them. Why? Because he understands how important it is for England to see America as a place of law and order. And so he agrees to do it, even though he knows this could very well be the end of his career. By the way, John Adams at this time, it's a pretty new idea to kind of make your living as a lawyer. Earlier than about 1730, it would be really unusual to have someone say, oh yeah, that's my profession. What is the law prior to that? It's like, kind of a pastime for gentlemen. They'll dabble in the law and practice, but no one's trying to make a living at it. That's a pretty new thing. And Adams is trying to make it. Does he have a farm? Yeah, he has a farm, but he's trying to make a living as a lawyer. So it's kind of a big deal. Anyway, he says this: facts are stubborn things. Whatever may be the wishes or the inclinations or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. By the way, does he get the guys off? So the first trial is actually for Captain Preston, the leader of these 8 men from the 29th Regiment, who's there at the Boston Massacre. And the whole question is Preston guilty of giving the order to fire? Clearly, people were yelling at those soldiers to fire, even the colonists who were standing there. Why don't you just fire at us? They're really frustrated with it. They know these soldiers can't fire unless they have a direct order from their superior officer, or if their lives are immediately in danger. So they're kind of taunting them, knowing that they really can't. I think everyone is surprised when someone fires, and then the rest of the soldiers fire. Boston Massacre, here's a picture. So the first trial actually deals with this guy right here, Captain Preston. And in the picture, there's a famous etching by Paul Revere. In the picture here, it's not at all what happened, by the way, but we've got Captain Preston kind of inclining his sword forward. What is he in the picture? What is he doing? Yeah, that is the like the sign language to attack. And everything about this almost everything about this event is disputed. And we literally have hundreds of depositions that were taken after this, both from Patriot side as well as the Tory side. And it's a really interesting part of history in general, not just American history, because there are few events in modern history, kind of 18th century or earlier, where we have so much information and yet still no one really knows what happened. We have a crazy amount of information about this one. But one of the things that seems not to be in dispute, at least for the jury, is where Preston is standing when the firing happens. He's not behind his men. He's standing in front of his men, between his men and the colonists. And they reasoned, yeah, as much as we'd like to convict this guy, we hate him and all like him. The facts and evidence are he was standing in a place that doesn't make sense for him to stand if he's the one calling for them to fire. So he's acquitted. As soon as he's acquitted, now the question is, which of the other 8 now are guilty? And so we have a second trial. 6 of the 8 are acquitted outright, but 2 of them are convicted, not of murder, but they're convicted of manslaughter. What's the punishment for murder in 18th century English jurisprudence? Yeah, death penalty. You're going to hang you until you're dead. So good news, you're only convicted of manslaughter, not murder, What's the bad news? Penalty for manslaughter is also death. So, but, and kind of the whole reason that it's important is because manslaughter is administered with the benefit of clergy. Have you heard of it? The benefit of clergy. When I first read about it, I thought it means you get to have a clergyman there when you die, so you can have last rites or something. That's not what it means at all. So it turns out it's a fascinating legal fiction in British jurisprudence of this time, kind of going back to the 1500s. So it turns out if you were a clergyman, you weren't held responsible to the civil authority. So if you broke the law, the civil courts had nothing to do with you. You were tried by the church. You might end up with a harsher penalty, being tried by the church, and especially kind of going back into the 13 and 1400s, that was the way it was. Now, and so if you could prove that you were a clergyman and you'd had some civil authority had given some penalty, that would just be vacated. Well, by this time, Great Britain is pretty uncomfortable with the idea of capital punishment. In fact, you talk about a capital crime. If you steal goods worth more than a shilling, that's a capital offense. And yet the people of England are pretty uncomfortable with killing someone for more than a shilling. Maybe it's more than a pound. Anyway, it's not a tremendous amount. They're pretty uncomfortable with killing someone for stealing something that's really not all that valuable. And so we've kind of come up with this fiction, the benefit of clergy. If you could prove, if you have had a capital penalty, like you're sentenced to death, and you can prove you're a clergyman, the sentence is vacated. It's not like it's commuted to like life in prison. No, it's just vacated. You're set free. And so the two that are convicted, Montgomery and Kilroy, privates Montgomery and Kilroy, after they're convicted, they say, well, hold on a second, we're clergymen. And they kind of look, you're a clergyman? What do you mean you're a clergyman? Well, can you prove it? Well, yes. Well, what do you have to do to prove that you're a clergyman? You've got to be able to read one verse of the Bible. That's it. If you can do that, you must be a clergyman. And the truth is, to really be a practicing clergyman, you have to be male and white. But this is administered regardless of race and regardless of gender. So we actually have records in Virginia of like former slaves, who are even a slave who is convicted of stealing something that would be a capital punishment. He says, hey, I'm a clergyman, and he can prove that he's a clergyman, and so he's let off. So yeah, now, so what verse do you have to do? Not only is it just read a verse from the Bible, you get to pick the verse. Actually, you don't get to pick the verse, but you know what the verse is. The verse is Psalms chapter 51, verse 1. It's known as the neck verse because if you knew this verse, it literally could save your neck. And it's basically King David imploring forgiveness for his sins. That's the verse. So it says, hey, we're clergymen. Well, yeah, we'll prove it. And they hand him the Bible. And sure enough, Kilroy is able to read that verse, proving that he's a clergyman. Montgomery, not only is Montgomery able to read the verse, he's able to read it upside down. Doesn't even turn the book right side up to be able to read it when he reads it, so-called. And so, wow, these guys are clergymen who knew, I guess we're not going to kill them after all. So instead, they were both branded with an M right here on the meaty part of their thumb, M standing for manslaughter, because you only got to invoke the benefit of clergy once in your life. So even though these two guys are convicted, which should be a death penalty, they're both let off, and they go on to live kind of unremarkable lives, kind of live to be old men, having had this kind of brush with this event that is kind of so important to us in American history. Not even talked about in English history at all, but in American history, it's a big deal. Okay, that's kind of fun, longer than I wanted to talk about it, but kind of fascinating. All right, so we've got stuff to do today. File to download, so go ahead and download, where are we on? Custom dialogues with user forms is what we're after. This term user form is kind of a strange word. I've said it so many times now, it seems normal, but we're creating forms for people to use, and that's what they are. So we've got product form.xlsm. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. I think we've dealt with this data before when we were dealing with, like, I think debugging. Now, I zoom out here a bit. So this is that same data that is from this online outdoor outfitting company. So what do we have here? We've got like duck calls and like arrows and clothing and the pet taxi small yellow, whatever that is. The Grandview bird feeder, things you might buy in an outdoor store.
Professor,
Yeah.
we can't see it on screen.
I am sharing the wrong screen. So let me stop sharing. Thank you. And let me start sharing screen 2. Are you seeing it? Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Excellent. In fact, I don't think I need to, since I've done showing the game, I don't think I need to show my picture anymore. Nope. Okay. All right, so let's suppose that kind of our job here is to be able to edit this data. We're keeping this data here for whatever reason. We need to edit it from time to time. What would you say? Is this a good interface for editing a record of data or a bad interface? This is like, I got to change information about the sleeping mallard. Apparently, that's going to be like a duck decoy or something. So, is this a good interface or a bad interface for doing that? This is a terrible interface for editing this record. What's wrong with it?
You have to know where it's at.
Well, so you got to be able to find it, and they give us tools to be able to find it. That's not so bad. But if I can look, I've got lots of pixels. I mean, I don't know how many. I got millions of pixels up here on the screen. And yet I don't even have enough to show all the information I'm going to edit. How far do I have to zoom out before I can see all the information I'm editing here? Pretty far. Not terrible. I could probably work with it on that close. But the point is, everything besides the line I have highlighted here is irrelevant to the current task. Right? Like my current task is, I just want to edit this one record, and it's all right here on one row. So it'd be great if I could somehow organize that in a way that's better. Okay, so that's one of the things that's deficient about this way for editing this record. What else is going to be problematic? And this is kind of, has to do with doing this in Excel. Well, another thing that's deficient here is that my tools for validating data are pretty limited. So there's a whole set of data validation tools, and that might work pretty well for like this kind of a category here, where there's only like the departments, like 4 departments: hunting, outdoor, apparel, and general. So I could set up a list. In fact, do I have a list over here? Yeah, so I've got a list over here. So I could kind of use this list and set up data validation. That worked pretty well for that one. But what kind of data validation rule am I going to do for the name? I'd like to be able to say, listen, you've got to have a name. You can't be deleting the name. And so I'd like to be able to get this set up in such a way that I could use VBA, all the power of VBA, to do really complex data validation. And so that's going to be then helpful as well. And so fortunately in VBA, there's a mechanism for doing this very thing. It's called a user form. So let's take a look at it. I'm going to go ahead and open up my code window. Ooh, I have no modules. Is that right? No modules? Insert. Now I'll go ahead and insert a regular module here. Oh, maybe there already was a module. I wasn't showing. Don't create a module. Let me close this one. Close that module. I'm going to open up my Project Explorer. Yeah, okay, so we already have a module. And I'm going to delete module 2. Oh. It's really interesting. Somehow I gave you the file. Do you have this form in your file? This is what we were going to do today. Class dismissed. So I'm going to delete this form and we're going to start again from scratch. That should not be here. So I'm just going to, you can leave it there if you want. You can make another one. We'd have to change the name. Well, okay. I'm just going to delete it. Remove form product. It's asked me, do I want to export it before I remove it? No, I don't want to export it. Okay. So to create a form, here's how we do it. First of all, remember that the only place that we can write VBA code where it will be saved when we save the workbook is in a module. And so we're going to be writing a bunch of VBA, and so we're going to create a module, but we're going to create that module inside of a user form. In fact, when we create a user form, it automatically creates a module that goes along with it. So far, every time we've wanted to save code, we've come here and we've inserted a module. Now we're going to insert a user form. So inserting a user form, and it gives me this. It gives me this kind of graphical image that I can use to kind of draw my form. That's kind of nice. If I double click it, it'll take me to the module that's behind the form. Well, I can go ahead and kind of close that module and it'll take me right back to the form. By the way, these two buttons up here in your Project Explorer allow you to toggle back and forth between the code and the form. But if you just close whichever one is on top, like if I close the form, kind of keep closing, got nothing open, I can just double click the form, user form 1, that'll bring my form back. And so I've got then some tools here that I can use to kind of build this form up. So that's what we're about to do. And there's gonna be some things that are really different about VBA, some new characteristics we haven't been exposed to yet, now that we're dealing here in form. Now, if you don't have dealing here with a user form, if you don't have the toolbox showing, then the way you get to it is by this. Let me zoom in on it. So you've got a tool up here that looks like a little hammer with a wrench across. This icon always looks vaguely communist to me, and I always feel a little uncomfortable clicking on it. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen, but I think it just brings up the tools. Windows. There we go. Brings up my little toolbox. Okay. So these tools, we call them controls. And so a control is just an object that you're going to put on a form. Why is it called a control? I don't know. It seems like a weird name to me, but that's what they're called. They're called controls. Oh, it says right there, controls. The first one here is no control at all. That's just that's the way you unselect any one of these other tools that you might have been interested in. So let me look at this first one here. This is the label control. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to click and drag to create that label here on my form. And maybe I will try to work zoomed in here a bit. So don't, got a lot more room than I need here. Okay. All right, so I can kind of move this around, you know, and I can put data in here. The label control is for creating data that the user sees but cannot change. So as the user is concerned, this is static data. And so I think what I'm going to do with this one is, let me go ahead and configure this to show like the product ID. So see if I can bring my, okay. So I'm going to want to show the product ID. I'm going to show the name, the category, the manufacturer, and so forth. But this product ID, I don't want the user editing this. And so on my form, we're going to put it in this. But I would like to, I'd like it to kind of look like, you know, something that's holding data. So I'm just going to configure it. So we've got properties. If your properties window isn't showing, F4 will bring up the properties window. There we go. And the first property that we want to think about changing on every control is the name. These are listed alphabetically except the name, because the name is so important, it shows at the top. So any control that we're going to have to refer to in our code, we want to give a name that's other than the name that came up by default, because the name that comes up by default, label 1, is not helpful looking at the code. Now, there's kind of a convention in VBA that you use 3 letters to identify what kind of control it is. This is a label control. So I'm going to just call it LBL, and then maybe just capital ID, LBL ID. That way, when I look at the reference to this object in my code, I can go, okay, that's a label control, and it's dealing with the ID. I might call it LBL product ID or prod ID or just ID, that's fine. Okay, so that's the name by which this, this form shall be known on the records of VBA throughout its life. We could give it a name and a blessing if you wanted to. We could bless it to be a good control. The rest of these properties are going to be, you know, controlling the way that this control looks. And so I'd like to put a border on this. Okay, so border style right now is 0. I'm going to change that to border style 1. That'll put a border on it. That looks pretty good. The background color, it's kind of light gray. I'd like to make it a little bit darker gray. And there's a couple of different options I have. I can say, listen, your system is configured to show some colors. You can make this the same color as the active title bar, the same as the menu text on your Windows. I typically will come over here and say, let's just come to a palette. I just want to make that kind of a light gray, maybe a little darker gray background. Whoops, that's the border color. I think I want the border color to be black. And the back color is the one that I want to change. Back color palette, kind of number 3 gray. There we go. And then I think I might want the text to be centered. So there's got to be something about dealing with centering text here. Text align. I'll change this one to be text align center. Is that center? Yeah. Okay, so I think I've got my first label configured. Oh, you know what? I can also change properties of the form itself. So we've just seen how to change properties of one of my controls, but if I select the form, I can change the caption of the form right here. So there's a caption property, and I'm going to call this edit product info. And the form itself has a name. It's called user form 1. Again, a pretty bad name, doesn't tell me much about it. I'll use a 3-digit prefix, FRM, and I'll just call it product. Form product, or just form prod. In case you kept your other form product around, this one we'll call form prod. And so there's lots of properties that we can kind of fiddle with on all these to kind of get them to do specific things. So I think I'll make this a little bit narrower. And now I'll bring in another control. So the control I'd like to do now, lost my controls. The control I'd like to do now is the next one over is called a text box control. So I'll click it, and then I will click and drag to bring it on. It's kind of tall. And so this one is where I'm going to let the user edit the name of the product. So I'll call this a text box control. So I'll call it txt name. And we're going to ultimately want to get that so it displays the name of the product for the user. And there's lots of different controls. We're going to work with these controls quite a bit. But here's just a couple to get us started. How are we doing so far? Questions? Okay. Now, by the time we're done editing the data here, we're probably going to want to, it's kind of annoying to have to go and get that toolbox every time I change from my code. Is it helpful to have it large, or is it just as fine if I'm smaller? Let me go back here. Are you okay this way? Looks like we're okay. All right, I'm going to stick with this then. Okay, so there's a tool right here called the command button. They got another one here called a toggle button, option button, but we're after this one here called the command button. This is the idea here. This button is going to be for running a command. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to bring that control on. So I'll click it to select it, and then I'll click and drag to draw that on. And this is just going to be my OK button. So for the name, it's a command button. So I'll call it CMD and then OK. And I want the caption to say OK as well. So we'll just say OK on the caption. Okay, so I've got a button there that after the user has edited this data, they can click on that, and that's going to do a couple of things. It's going to save their changes back to the worksheet, and it'll close the form. Now, there's a new idea here in working with forms called events. We've talked about objects so far. Objects have 2 characteristics that are really important to us. What are they? Objects have properties, which information that describes how the object is, and they have methods, which is something the object knows how to do. Well, some objects also have events, and an event is something that the object can respond to happening. So in other words, when a particular object receives an event, then we can say, oh, we want to run some code. When that button gets the click event, we want to run some code. So far, every time we wanted to run code, it's like, oh, I've got a subprocedure, run that subprocedure, either with a hotkey or by clicking on some object, a button that we've put onto the worksheet, or they just opened up the list of macros that run this macro. But now it's going to be different. We're going to say, hey, this form now is just kind of watching and waiting for different events to happen. And when those events happen to the right objects, that's what's going to trigger the code. It's really different. And so let's take a look at this. So the way that I get to the code for a particular object is like by double clicking on it. So here I've got the button selected. and I'll double click. And this is taking me to my code. And this is now an event sub procedure. Here's the name of my object, underscore the name of the event. When this button receives the click event, this code is going to run. Well, there's been a couple of, on all of our modules, these two little drop-down boxes are here. We've never dealt with them now, and they're really important when we start working with a form. Through this one on the left, we can select which object we're interested in manipulating. So here I can say, all right, we're interested in CMD OK. You see why it's important that we've named these in a way that we can kind of understand which ones they are by looking at the name. I'll choose CMD OK here. And when that is the object that's selected, over here, I get my list of events. These are all the events that this object can respond to. How many do you think there are? It's got to be click. There's at least, one. How many are there? There's a bunch of them. So it can respond to the user clicking it, can respond differently to the user double clicking it. It can respond when, let's see, is there an enter here? Yeah, when the user enters it. In other words, when this receives the focus, you know how sometimes you can like tab, and you can kind of see the different parts of your form like activate? Yeah, that would trigger the enter event. When it loses the focus, that's going to be the exit event. Wow, we could actually do something different when the mouse goes up from when the mouse goes down. Those are separate events that we can make code respond to. I love this one, mouse move. If the mouse moves even 1 pixel over this event, we can make code execute. Let's go ahead and do something with this one, just to drive home this idea of objects receiving events. Because the one you're going to think of naturally is click, but this exercise is going to show us it's not just clicking that we can respond to. We can respond to lots of different events, lots of different activities. So I selected the mouse move event with my command button selected in the first drop-down box. I select the mouse move event and it generates this one. Okay, so these other ones that are here that are empty, I don't need them. I'll delete them just so that we don't got extra code here on the screen. It doesn't hurt to leave them around. I just want to simplify things. This one says, hey, not only is it going to call this method, but it's going to pass some values into this method. I'm going to get some information here about which button might be clicked while the mouse is moving. If the shift key is down while the mouse is moving, so I can do differently if the shift key is down, and I'll get an X and a Y coordinate value as to where that mouse move event is actually happening on the button. So this is going to give me kind of a lot of information. Okay, so here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to change some of the properties of this button when the mouse moves on it. So here, let me just do this. Let's say, so my button is CMD OK. I'll say the dot, and it's going to give me my list of different methods or properties that I can work with here. And I'm interested in the left property. It has a property left, which basically says how far this button is from the left of the form. It's the horizontal position of the button. I'm going to say that's going to equal some random number, R&D. That's going to be a number between 0 and 1. So a random proportion of the width of the form. So my form is called FRM prod dot, and it has a property called inside width. The width of the form is like the width including the border. It's the outside width of the form. The inside width is just the part where I can put my controls. Okay, so what does this line of code do? Yeah, it's going to change the horizontal position. Where's it going to change it? Some random position as wide as the form is allowed to be. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. Here's my form. And is the mouse move event happening right now? The mouse move event is happening like crazy. Every single time it moves a pixel, it fires that mouse move event. But which object is receiving the mouse move event right now? The form is receiving it. Now this text box is receiving it. There's no code set up to respond to that. This label control is receiving it. But as soon as the button receives it, and you might say, hey, that mouse is moving over it, but it's not any part of the mouse pointer. It is the very tip of that mouse pointer that triggers it. So as soon as that tip hits it, it's going to move. Oh, wow. It's like it moved right under where it already was. So I should be able to click on it. Yeah. Kind of as I move to it, it just wants to move away. Now, problem is it's kind of going off the form. Why is it going off the form? Yeah, it's setting where the left is anywhere from the proportion on here. Okay, so I'd like to make it, I mean, that could actually go so it's barely even showing. I don't know that we're going to get it, really dramatically off. Oh, there's one right there. I don't want that to happen. I don't mind moving the button around on someone, but I'd like to, make it a fair game that they can always see it. So instead of doing the whole width, oops, let me go ahead and stop my code. Instead of doing the whole width, let's change this down to the inside width minus the width of my button. So cmd OK dot width. Okay, so now I'm subtracting off the width of the button how far the button is allowed to move. So now if it hits 1, it should push the button over so the whole thing is still showing. That should be where it is. I think I want my button to be, my form to be a little bit bigger. So let me just come back to my form and just make it a bit bigger here. And run this. And so now we can see that never is that going to push off the form because I've restricted where it's allowed to run. All right. Well, if we're really going to make this, fun for Edna in accounting, let's not just change the left position, but let's change the top position as well. And so the inside height and minus the height of the button. So now it'll move vertically and horizontally. And remember, the whole point here is that it's when the object receives the event that is triggering that code. Now, just for fun, I'm going to write a joke in VBA and we're going to see if you can get it. See if you can appreciate what this next line is going to do. I'll do it above. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say cmd OK dot width equals what it used to be minus 2. That is going to make this a lot more stressful for Edna. Why? Yeah, every time it moves, it won't be perceptible at first. But I thought buttons move. I got to get it. Hey, I got it. Hey, I got it. And then right about now, she's going to go, is that button? It is getting smaller. Oh no, what? I'm in trouble now. I'm going to get it though. Oh, it's gone. Okay. So I probably don't really want to leave that button that way because I do have to click on it myself. I'll come to your question here in just a second. So let's do this. Hey, April is coming up, so let's do this. Let's stop our code. Let's say, now I don't think we've ever used this function here, but there's a function called now that just returns the current time from the system clock. And I can ask for the month of now, and that should give me 2 because we're in February. So I'm going to say if the month of now is equal to 4 and the day of now is equal to what? 1, then we'll do this. So this is going to happen on exactly 1 day every year. When? April Fool's Day. Yeah. So that will have the effect of letting me use the button today just fine. But as soon as April Fool's Day rolls around, that thing's going to go like crazy. Okay, there's a question here. Could we make the mouse get bigger? Button gets smaller, mouse gets bigger. Not easily. If I can in Windows, it's not that functionality is not built into VBA. I would have to like invoke some of the like the underlying functionality of Microsoft Windows, which you can do from VBA. We're not going to do it in this class. It's pretty heavy duty to do. Okay, so the whole point of this example, is that something you would ever really do? Maybe. But it's to drive home this idea that when I'm thinking about when is code going to execute, I always have to think in terms on a user form. I got to think in terms of when an object receives an event. All right, so before we actually put the code on this button to do what its namesake, is suggesting that it's going to do, let's make it so that when we start this form up, we get to see actually see some data on there. So think in terms of object and event. I'll tell you the object. The object that we're looking for is going to be the form. So when something happens to the form, and they don't use the name of the form here, they just call it the form, user form down here. So select the form and then choose, take a look at the list of events and say, which event looks like might be the one that's going to be the one I'm interested in using for when we want this code to happen when the form first opens. We want to say, go get the data off the worksheet and put it on the form to use with. So what do you think it is? So activate is a pretty good, activate's a pretty good choice. It's not the one that we're after. Activate will happen anytime the form becomes active. And so if I have like two forms open at the same time, as I go back and forth between one form and the other, the activate's going to happen each time. So I'm looking for something that's going to happen just once when the form opens. Initialize, yeah. So, and folks, gosh, where's initialize? Does it say it here? Yeah, here's initialize. So, so how would you even know that? And you would do just exactly what we did. I think it might have to do with this object. So then look at the list of events and just read through them. Do we know what all these events do? No. But, you might look at it and say, oh, maybe activate will work. And you might say, start working with that one. And that would probably work until you, just fine until you ended up having two forms at a time. And then you go, oh boy, something's wrong here. You go, add control before drag over click, we probably get double click, we probably get. You might get to initialize and go, oh yeah, maybe it's that one. So it turns out a form can be kind of in three different places. It can be just saved as part of the workbook. That's the form is closed. But then we can load, it can be loaded into memory, but not showing. So if it's loaded into memory, my code can refer to all the controls that are on it. It could, change the values. And then there's another event that happens when it actually becomes visible. And that's when the activate would get triggered in this context. So as soon as we read it into memory, that's when initialize happens. And so if we put code on the initialize event, then everything we do there will happen before it becomes visible. And so we'll be configuring that information. And then once that is done running, then it will go and activate and show itself. So initialize is where we want to be. So I'm going to select that. And now let's just go ahead and put some code here for initialize. Here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to start off by saying the row that has the data on it is going to be pretty important for me to keep track of. So I'm going to create a variable for that. I'm going to call it row, dim row as a long integer. Now, when this form initializes, what I'd like to do is actually figure out which row. Now, which row should we start with? Probably the row that has the active cell. Maybe that's the way the user is going to signal. This is what I want to edit. This one right here, they'll press a control key, or we'll put a tab. We'll put a tab up here in the ribbon that will let them, say, I want to edit the current record or whatever. I'll show you how to do that, but it's towards the end of the class. But you choose the row and then say, now I want to edit that row. Good. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say my row is equal to active cell dot row. Now, every time we need to refer to pulling data off the sheet, I'm going to use my row variable. Truth is, I could just continue to use active cell dot row. My code could change which row is active, and so I kind of like this better. So I'm going to read the active row, or the row of the active cell when it first loads, and then that's the row. I don't care what else is happening. That's the row I'm working on. All right. So let's see how to change a property of one of these controls here in code. So let's take LBL ID dot I want to actually put the row, whatever's in column 1 of my data table, into this control. So which property do you think it is? Do you think it's the accelerator property that I'm after? The auto size property, the back color? No, 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 no. What is it? What's that? So is there a label control, a label value? No label. Yeah, it's caption. Seems like it should be called text or value to me, but they called it caption. I don't get to pick the names of them. Caption is what it is. And so caption is what that label shows. Just like the caption was the property we changed to say what the top of the form showed. It was the caption property. All right, so now, let's see. I'm probably feeling pretty comfortable that we're on the right sheet, but let me just go ahead and refer to the sheet as well. So if I look up here, I can see that the code name for this worksheet is data. And so let's go ahead and refer to it by that. So data dot cells, row number, row, column number 1 is where the ID is, and I want the value. So I'm going to read the value property off of the cell that I identify with this expression here, and I'm going to put it into the caption. So if I run this now, run this form now, it should bring up the product ID for whichever row I'm on. That's pretty good. So we're showing product 319. You know, and it kind of looks like it's not editable. You know, it's kind of grayed out, and you know, I can see it's data because it's got a rectangle around it, but I can't change it. That's right. I don't want the user changing the product ID. Right. So now let's go ahead and bring a value in for this. So the name is in column F. So let's go ahead and bring the name in as well. Now, one of the little tricks here is that in code, there's an alias for the form. And this is really kind of nice. It might make sense to refer to the form by its name, FRM prod. But if I change the name of the form, there's lots of reasons I might want to change the name of this form. I don't want to have to go through and change all the references to the form in the code. So there's an alias built in called me, M-E. Me refers to the form that this code is on. And so if I say me dot, and then I say, I can't remember the name of that text box, but I know it's a text box, so TXT, that's going to show me, oh, it's going to take me all those properties. So I can go, oh, it's TXT name, that's the one I'm after. So you don't really need the me here, but type it, it doesn't hurt to leave it, but typing it on and then giving your 3-letter prefix will kind of get you to the list that you can work. That's kind of nice. So that's the object. What's the property that I want to change of this one? Caption? There's no caption property. Ah, there is a text property. And it seems like back in the olden days, like in the 90s, when I was first doing this, that was the only one. I don't ever remember there being a value before, but there's also a value, and either one of those is going to work for us. I'll just go with text. So me.name.text equals, and now the same thing here, but it's in column, I think it's column 6. Is that F? A, B, C, D, E, F. Yeah, column 6. Or, of course, I could put F here. So now when the form gets initialized, we're going to put in that information here. It looks like I probably should make that a little bit wider. So let me go ahead and do that in my code. That looks a little better. Injection molded, cut back Canada, advantage 1.5 wetlands. Probably why this company went out of business. People are looking at that product name going, I have no idea what that is. I don't want to buy that. Okay, so now this one, of course, the whole point is this is editable. So instead of half wetlands, we're going to change this to 0.5 wetlands. And of course, we'd like to make it now so when the user clicks OK, it saves it out. Now, it's not doing anything now because we don't have any code on the click. Right, yeah, so there's the one, and of course, we're not changing it at all. So now it's time for us to go ahead and put some code on the click button. Actually, I think I'm gonna organize this a little bit differently. This initialize is where I want this code to happen, but I don't think I want to. There's going to be quite a bit because we got to write a line like this for every control that we put on, and some of them are going to be multiple lines. And I'd like to kind of leave this really just for dealing with kind of the bootstrapping of getting that form together. So let's do this. I'm going to create a sub procedure up here at the top called show data. So sub show data. And I really want to do this up here. So when we show the data, that's where we're going to do all. This is going to be doing everything that gets the information from the worksheet onto my form. Now I still, in my initialize, that's still when I want to say, hey, let's go ahead and right when this initializes, let's read that row, but then we're just going to call show data. Now I'm going to be referring to row both here in my initialize as well as up here in my show data. So what should I do with row here? I really have two options. What should it be? I can just change the scope of it. So that's one possibility, is I could say, instead of declaring it in here, let me declare it as a module level variable. And then when I set the value down in the forms initialize method or forms initialize sub procedure, then I can read that out here. That'll be just fine. My other option would be to set this up to kind of pass row in. So instead of setting it where everyone can use it, I can just say send row off to my save data. I like the first approach better here because ultimately I'm going to have to save, I'm going to have to know which row I'm saving the data to. And that's going to be a completely different procedure because that's going to be when the user clicks on the OK button. In fact, let's just go ahead and kind of set up the save data sub procedure as well. And then we'll just call it from the OK button. So sub save data. And this is going to be where we write the data back to the worksheet. And our show data is read the data from the worksheet. Okay, so I'm feeling a little bit better about this organization. So let's go ahead and make it so that the save data actually saves data. So initialize, I don't have any button here for it yet. So I'll come back to my form and double click on my button. It's going to say, hey, you've already written code on this button. So this must be the code you want. No, I want a different event. No problem. I've already got my CMD OK selected here in my object selector. So now I'm just going to choose the click event and it will generate that procedure for me to write that code. And all I want to do here, I just want to call save data. So when the user clicks OK, we're going to call save data. And then save data is going to come in. Here's where we'll write the saving part. But once it's done saving the data, I'm ready to exit the form. I have two options to close the form. One is to hide the form, and the other one is to unload it. So you remember my form can be either just part of the workbook, in memory, or visible. If I hide a form, it takes it from visible, leaves it in memory. So any data that I might have on it, if I was to show it again, would still be there. Whereas if I unload it, I've got a form that's visible, I unload it, it takes it off the screen and takes it out of memory altogether. And since I'm putting the data on the form when it initializes, I think I want to go ahead and unload it. So the next time I show that form, it'll go through its initialization process again. Back in the 90s, we would think about how long it took to read that form from the workbook to be able to display it. And we might think, oh, that takes too long. But now it doesn't take too long. It's so fast. It's just a matter of convenience for us. And so I'm going to unload me. Right? Remember, me is a reference to the form that the code is in. This would work just the same. Say frm prod. It's another way to get to that same object. But I'll say unload me. Which is close. Okay, so talk to me. What do I have to do up here? So when I click OK, it's first going to save data, then it's going to unload. What do I have to do up here now to save the data? Only so far, I only have one thing they can change. I'm only dealing with the name. Any thoughts? Yeah, okay. So in this case, I'm saying I want to read what's in the cell and put it into my text control. And saving is just exactly the opposite. I want to take what is in the text control and I want to set my worksheet's value equal to that. And so this is going to allow me to write that data to actually save that change. So let's see which one I am. I'm on, oh, there's one called spearmint. I wonder if that's edible. The bourbon was, that's the description. The bourbon was almost $70. I don't know what's going on, but spearmint sounds fine. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run my form. And it's up here now, says spearmint. I'm going to change it to peppermint. And we'll say okay. And I think it's going to actually take us back to VBA. I wonder if we'll see it before it takes us back. It flashed there for just a moment, but now we can see it. Now it says peppermint because we told it, read off the form right back out to the worksheet. Okay, show me how you're feeling about this so far, 0 to 5. 5, it was like a pronounced 5, 5, 4s and 5s. Okay, yeah. Some of you are at 3s and 4s. This is brand new stuff, so that's all right. Okay, so now the question is, and one of the things that I kind of sold you on this idea was that we could do more advanced data validation. So where should I put my data validation code? Let's say that I want to say you're not allowed to wipe the name out altogether. There's got to be at least something there for the name. Where should I do it? Yep. So one option is to do it in save data. It's not the only possibility. What's the other? There's one other kind of logical place. Yeah, it's so, do I want to say, all right, we're trying to save the data. Step 1 in saving the data is check to make sure that the data is valid. Or do I want to say, listen, before we even save the data, let's check to make sure it's valid. And I like it, checking it before we call save data, and I'll show you why I like it that way. Let's come in here and we're just going to put a check here to make sure that there is something in there. So I'm going to say if, and I'm going to look to see if this is, I'm going to do an expression that will check to see if it's a violation. So I want to know, so what would be, how could I tell if that rule, the business rule is all products must have a name? So how would I write an expression that returns true when that rule is violated? me.txt name.value. What do I want to know about that value? Okay, so if it's blank, that's no good. Another way to say that this would be a fine way to do it. Another way to do it would say, hey, if the length of that is equal to 0, it's another way to say, is it blank? I'm indifferent as to these two approaches. There's actually an isEmpty function that will return true if it's empty. I think that would work okay as well. Then and if. Now I'm going to put a message box up to the user. Message box. What are we going to say? The message is you must provide a name. This is an error, so I'm going to put VB critical. I'll make a sound and put a red X on it. Oh, how harsh. And then a title. Users love it when you say this, user error. User error. You must provide a name. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. Actually, let's do this. I'd like to give myself a hotkey to be able to open up this form. Maybe I'll do Control Shift E to run this form. It turns out I can't just assign a hotkey to opening a form. I can assign a hotkey to running some code. So let me come back to my module 1. Oh, that's why we have this. Some of the stuff we did kind of earlier in class. You go ahead and just kind of move this down. I'm going to make a sub procedure here called edit product. And all it's going to do is going to open that form. FRM prod dot, it's either show or open. show. Hey, by the way, could I say me.show here? Me refers to the form that contains the code that's currently executing. What's the form that's currently executing? What's the form that's holding this code that's executing right here? No form, it's just a regular module. This would be really confusing. I don't even think it's legal. Well, syntactically it's okay, but it won't execute. So that's just going to show the form. Now that I've got a regular subprocedure that's showing the form, I should be able to attach a hotkey to it. So I'm going to come to my developer tab, come to my list of macros. Edit product is the one. I'm going to click on options. And here's where I can assign capital E to it. This is open the product editing form. All right, so now I can be right here on Peppermint, press Control-Shift-E. It'll open my form up. I will delete this. And what should I expect now to see when that's empty when I click OK? I'm expecting what? Yeah, I'm expecting to see my dialog box. It gave me a little sound, a nice red X, user error. I always love that. You must provide a name. Probably should say the product has to have a name here. That's okay. Now, what should happen when I click OK? Say that again. I should stay on the form. And I shouldn't change the name. But I don't think I'm quite there yet. I'll click OK. Form closes, name is gone. So I checked to see that I validated that rule. I gave the user a message, but I let him change it anyway. That's no good. So the reason that I prefer to have the data validation, oops, let me come back to my user form. The reason I prefer to have the data validation when we're clicking OK is because at this point, if I just say exit sub, then I never get to save data. I never get to unload me. If I've done this data validation up here in save data, I've got to do something to keep track of telling it not to save the data. That's an if statement, that's okay. But it's the part about not unloading that's going to be problematic. So this is kind of a nice structure. You clicked OK, great, let's run through all of our checks. And we could have dozens. It would not be unusual to have dozens of things that we're validating here. And then if it passes them all, it gets to the save data, and then it knows to go ahead and save data out. Okay, so now let me just go back to my form and put something back in here. Spearmint, is there like, is it spearmint or spearmint? Spearmint, I don't know. Spearmint. Control-Shift-E. I'll delete that. Click OK. There's my error. And now it leaves me right here. In case you're wondering, in my mind today, while we're going over these examples, I'm thinking, I want to teach them everything they need to know to be able to do the project that goes along with user forms. So, you know, all this stuff, this is what I'm going to ask you to do in a different context. Okay, questions so far? Okay, let's move on to some different controls. So now we kind of got our structure set up. When we open the form, it shows the data. When we say okay, it does some validation, saves the data. Now we just got to get some experience in some of these different forms, some of these different controls. All right, so let me come back to my user form. And here, let's do a list box next. Okay, so a list box allows us to have multiple options kind of showing and then allow the user to just pick one with a single click. So what makes sense for a list box? None of those. Promotions, maybe promotions do. Let's go ahead and kind of put up the promotion that we might want to use here. This promotion, dealing with the promotion is going to be a little bit more complex. I'd like to do the list box before I do the combo box because the combo box is a combination of a list box and a text box. But I think you'll be okay seeing the combo box first. So let's do the combo box first. And that will just be we'll just put our list of manufacturers into the combo box. Okay, so next one we're going to put is the manufacturer. So why don't I go ahead and put a label on this one just to allow me to choose the manufacturer. The label will show that this is for the manufacturer. So I'm just going to bring that label on and put the text in it, manufacturer. Oops. So change the caption to be U-F-A-C-T-U-R-E-R, manufacturer. Let me kind of close that down. I'm not sure why this comes in with a background color. I think I'm going to change the background style to be transparent. Background style, transparent. It happens, it comes with a color that's the same background as the form, so it wouldn't have been the end of the world if I left it that way. I think I prefer it not to have any background at all. Okay, now with this label, I changed the way it looked because I wanted it to seem like data, but this one I just wanted it to seem like a label to the user. This one up here, my label ID, I'm changing that through code, so I changed the name. This one, I'm not changing it. It's going to be manufacturer. I'm not going to change it through code. I'm going to refer to it through code. So I'm probably just going to leave this one as label 1. Could I change it to LBL manufacturer? Sure, but I don't really get any bang for that. So I'm going to leave it with its default name. And then I'm going to bring in the combo box, which is this one right here, combo box. So you're familiar with this, right? It's going to give you something, one to see. You can click the little drop down and you'll see the list to choose from. So I'll bring that on and just kind of put it here under manufacturer. Now, it's going to take a little more work to get this, because there's a couple things I have to do. One, I've got to get the name of the manufacturer into this combo box. That's easy. It's just exactly like working with a text box. So let me come to my code, and where I'm showing the data, I'm just going to copy my text box. Oh, whoops, I forgot to change the name. Let me give that a name. I'm going to call this CBO combo manufacturer. So CBO manufacturer. Okay, so now I'll go to my code. I've changed the name of my combo box, CBO manufacturer. Now I'll go back to my code, and instead of me.text.name, I'll do me.cbo manufacturer dot text equals wherever the manufacturer is. Where is the manufacturer? It is in column D. And in fact, I think I'm ready also to write the line to save this one. Just have to reverse the order of these. Let's go ahead and give it a shot. Hey, I got my manufacturer in there. That's great. One problem is I want a bunch in here to choose from. So I think I could probably even change this here. Calls, okay. Changes it to cut down call. But I've only done the text box portion of this thing. In fact, I don't want to change it to someone that's not a real one, so let me put that back. All right, so let's take a look at what we're going to have to do to load this, to load the values into this. So when we're showing data here, maybe before we put the value in, I'm going to load the combo boxes list. All right, it turns out we've got a property here of the combo box. So me.cbo manufacturer dot, and sorry, not a property, we've got a method. So let's kind of look here at my methods. Which of these am I going to use to put an option into the list? Just of the methods that are showing right now on the, which one? There's only one method showing. It's kind of a trick question. Add item, it's the first one. And so that's what's going to put something into the list. So CBO manufacturer dot add item, and then it's not equals because I'm passing an argument to the function. So I can get something in that list just by calling that function. this is going to put cut down calls as an item in that list. Now, this isn't ultimately what I want to do, but that's just to kind of show how that works. So now I've got that one here. Well, I don't want just that one. I want every one that's over here on my lists. I've got this list of manufacturers that starts on row 2 of column E and just goes down until we. It'd be kind of nice if those were in alphabetical order. So let me go ahead and I'm going to just sort these. It doesn't really matter if they're sorted. Let me just go ahead and sort these. Don't extend. Okay. So instead of just loading and having that manufacturer name hard coded, I want to read them off the sheet. So the user can come and add new manufacturer right here, and my list box will just populate it. Great. Well, we've done this kind of loop a dozen times. So let me dim R as a long integer. R equals 2. I'm going to do until lists dot cells, row number R, column number, was it in column E? Dot value is equal to a 0 length string. Loop R equals R plus 1. Might as well throw a do events in here just for kicks, in case I accidentally put myself into an endless loop. And now that's the value that I want to put in there. So instead of having that hard coded, I'm going to read it off the sheet. So now when this initializes, read through all my list of manufacturers, plug that into the list of my combo box, and that will give the options for the user to choose. And so now I can choose from any of the manufacturers that are here. What happens if I start typing? Yeah, if I start typing, it finds the one there. That's pretty good. Now, I would also like to make it so the user is not allowed to do this. Have I deleted those? For sure, I've deleted them there. Cut down X. I don't want that because I think I just changed the manufacturer to cut down. Oh, I didn't. Oh, it was the top one. There it is. Good. Yeah, I don't want that to happen. I want to limit this to the list. Well, fortunately, there's a property that would let me limit it to the list. So let me select that. And what's the property for limiting this to the list? I can never remember. It's not limit. It's here somewhere. Did someone say it? I don't think it's blocked. I'll just read through them. Default behavior enabled. List style. Match entry. Match entry none, first letter. I think that's the lookup behavior. Match required. Match required is true. So now, if I come over here and we go ahead and fix this to a real one. And Control Shift E. So now what would happen if I try to change that to something that's not there? Wow, I don't even have to make the error. It makes the error for me. Improper value, property value. Not sure I'm really thrilled with that error message, but at least it won't let me do it wrong. But I can still change it to something else, Dart and Archery, and we've changed it to Dart and Archery. Okay, folks, that's getting started. We've got another day on user forums, and we've got more controls to learn. And so that's on the list for Monday. Thanks for coming, and class dismissed. Hey, you bet. Had no idea that you even had your phone out. Oh, here, I thought you were coming to ask me a question.
I mean, I could do that.
Yes, the question is, will you please give me the mark?